Do you have a toddler that's bouncing off the walls and can't sit still? Or maybe you have a toddler who doesn't like going on swings and slides. Or maybe your toddler doesn't like getting messy or getting their hands dirty. Whatever the case, you're going to want to stay tuned because today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is the sensory system and the impact it can have on learning for our little ones. So be sure to stay tuned because I'm also going to share my top tips for parents on what to do when you have those busy sensory seekers or sensory avoiders. In my many years of being an early childhood interventionist, I have seen firsthand how sensory processing challenges, difficulties, and preferences can impact learning for little ones, especially when it comes to speech and language. And I've also learned over that time that it's one of the things that I think sometimes parents don't have a foundational understanding of what's driving those behaviors and the things that they're seeing from their child. They just know they're really busy and it's driving me crazy, or they're always afraid of things and it's worrying me and I don't know what to do about it. So today I'm hoping to really demystify a lot of that for you so that you can have a better understanding of how your child's sensory system impacts their behavior and their learning. Most parents I work with, when we start talking about the sensory system, their understanding and knowledge is really kind of focused on the 5 senses that we all learned about in school: taste, touch, all that good stuff. But there are actually 2 other sensory systems that are very, very important, particularly in early childhood, that they don't really talk about in the baby books and such. And that is the vestibular sense and the proprioceptive sense. Both of these senses have to do with our coordination and movement. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to do a very, very concise overview of these 2 systems. They're very, very complex, and if you want more in-depth information on each of them, please check out the reference that I have below. So let's start by talking about the vestibular sense. The vestibular sense has to do with our balance and movement. It has to do with our inner ear and knowing where our body is in space. The proprioceptive sense has to do with the input that we're getting into our muscles and our joints. They work together to help us know where our body is and how much pressure we should be exerting, how we should be coordinating our movements. And they're really, really important if you think about movement and motor planning and all of those things in really young children. So our response to sensory information can be impacted by the intensity, the frequency, and the quantity of sensory information that's coming in. I mean, all of our senses are working together, and if there's a ton of information, we can get easily overwhelmed, or our toddlers can get easily overwhelmed. Now, I did do a video on the difference between tantrums and meltdowns, and in that video, I talk a lot about sensory overload, as well as some strategies that you can use to help if your child is experiencing sensory overload. I'm not going to talk about that today. So if you're concerned about that or experiencing that with your child, I highly recommend you go and check out that video. Today I want to really focus on the 2 areas that I see impacting parents and toddlers the most, and that is sensory seekers and sensory avoiders. So sensory seekers are those little ones who are constantly in motion or throwing things or jumping and climbing. They're looking for vestibular input. They may be looking for proprioceptive input, or they could be looking for both. Let me share a little story of a little guy who was a sensory seeker, and I'm going to call him Joey. He was a busy little guy. He was running in circles around the house, like for the entire hour that I was there, nonstop. He couldn't stop for more than 2 to 5 seconds to look at a toy before he had to take off again. He was struggling to sit in a high chair for meals or stay at a table for meals. You know, he struggled with bath time, taking naps. That was out the window. He couldn't do that. His mom was really, really overwhelmed with his activity level. And I should add that he had a very, very significant language delay. He had fewer than 5 words. So let's think about that in the context of learning, right? A big piece of being able to use language is you have to understand language. Well, in order to understand language, you have to have joint attention and engagement and circles of communication, back and forth turn taking and interactions. Now, with a little one who's in constant motion and can't sit still but 5 seconds at a time, how much learning can they really have in those moments? So that was the struggle for little Joey, was that he was in so much motion all of the time, and his brain was just saying to him, go, 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 run, 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 jump, run into the wall, tackle that thing, throw this. He couldn't focus on anything other than trying to meet his body's needs for sensory input. That's how this can get in the way of learning for little ones. So my cue for parents is to recognize when you see your little one bouncing off of the walls and climbing on stuff, and we're saying, don't do that, don't do that, that isn't going to have the impact that we want with our little ones. They can't stop. We can't tell them to stop doing something their brain is telling them that they need. What we have to do is recognize, oh, he needs sensory input right now, and then provide a way to get that input to the brain. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. So in a nutshell, sensory seekers are experiencing things less intensely. That's why they're seeking more of it. On the other side of this, we have sensory avoiders. They are experiencing sensory information from whatever situation, whether it's hearing or it's movement or motion or touch. They're experiencing it more intensely. So let me share another example. I'm going to call this little girl Mary. She was sweet. She loved being cuddled by her mom and by her dad, but she did not like being moved around quickly. She didn't like being on swings. She didn't like getting her hands dirty. So she was definitely a sensory avoider. So how this got in the way of learning for Mary was that she was always on guard during activities with others because she was feeling everything so intensely that it was difficult for her to focus on any joy during a lot of those interactions that involved those things that she was overwhelmed by, which are a lot of normal things that we do with kids, right? Swings, tossing them up in the air. She hated all of that. So in both of these situations, we had to find interventions and strategies that aligned with how each of these children were experiencing the sensory information that was coming in. Once they felt safe, as in Mary's situation, feeling safe and stable with the activities that we were doing, she was able to learn and we were able to move forward with her speech. For Joey, we had to meet the need for the movement in a way that allowed his brain to say, okay, I'm good, allowing more opportunities then for him to slow down and sit still for just a little bit to begin with so that we could focus on the learning. And then subsequently, his language took off. Okay, so my top tips for sensory seekers. The first one is to give them heavy work. So heavy work could be that they are pushing something heavy, for example, a wash basket filled with heavy books, or pulling the wash basket with heavy books. It could be that you get them jumping, and preferably, if they're able to and it's safe, having them jump on a harder surface as opposed to a bed or a trampoline. What we want to think about with our sensory seekers is that we get more bang for our buck when we are giving them input that affects the joints in the arms and in the hip, the knee, and the ankles. That's like a great way to flood the brain with those calm down chemicals. So if you have a little one who is doing a lot of climbing, right, maybe you have them jump on the floor and you keep them going until you get them huffing and puffing. That is my second tip. I kind of use that as my litmus test with sensory seekers. I want them to be huffing and puffing. So, for example, my son used to struggle sitting at the table to do his homework, and he would get distracted and get the fidgets, and I'd say, oh, it looks like you need to get some sensory input. So we would have him run around the backyard, and he'd run around the yard. Our neighbors probably thought we were crazy. What's this kid doing? And he would come up on the deck, and he'd be like, am I good? Can I come back in? He wasn't huffing and puffing. I would keep him running a couple more laps until he came up, and he's like, okay, I'm really tired. Can I come in now? He was able to come in, sit down, concentrate, and finish the task. Once he was huffing and puffing, I knew that his brain was finally like, okay, I'm good. I'm feeling the calm down chemicals. I can sit now. So heavy work, get him huffing and puffing. And then the last one is deep pressure. A lot of times these sensory seekers tend to be kids who, when they come over, they kind of lean on you, or they lean on the couch, or when you tell them to come to you, they run into you really, really hard. If you've got a sensory seeker, anytime they land on you, like they sit on your lap, you need to be giving them bear hugs. Big squeezes, bear hugs. If they land on me, I'm like, ooh, squeeze, 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 squeeze. Amazingly, I've had many parents over the years say, I can't believe he's sitting on your lap for that long. Normally he lands on me and then he takes off. I've actually had kids who are movers and shakers take my hands and put them back on them and want to do more of the deep squeezes, because deep pressure sends those calm down chemicals to the brain again. So anytime your little one lands on you, you need to do some deep pressure, and I like to do squeeze, 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 or hug, 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 and get in as much contact with their body as possible. Think about swaddling a baby. It's kind of the same idea. When we swaddle a baby, they're getting all of this nice, snuggly sensory input, and it allows them to calm down quicker. It's the same thing. So I like to get little ones up on my lap into like a little ball, get their knees up, get their arms tucked in, and then I'll squeeze them that way. I'm getting more surface area and coverage. Now, if they're pushing, like they want to be all done, okay, there you go. Let them go off. If they come back and you want to do it again, if they're letting you know, no, they don't like it, you just honor that, right? They're communicating with you. But most of the sensory seekers come back time and time again. And I should add this too, that even with those sensory seekers, my experience has been that if you provide them with enough of the sensory input that they're looking for, over time, as their sensory system matures, they need less and less of that. What we're really trying to do is look at the behavior, the indicators, the movement, the motion, the climbing, the throwing, all of those things, hitting, biting, all of those can be sensory seeking activities. When we see those things, we want to figure out what is a coping skill that I can teach my child to help them get through this patch and meet that brain's need. Okay, so let's talk tips for sensory avoiders. The first tip is for you as a parent to be patient with your child. I see a lot of parents getting really, really frustrated when their little one is reacting with anxiety or frustration or overwhelm to sensory input. Just know it's nothing that you've done. It's just the way that they're wired, right? They are who they are. What we have to do is look at it as a need, right? Something that we need to be in tune with and help them figure out how to overcome it, just like all of the things that they're going to need to overcome in the future. The next tip is to follow their lead. Little ones are very, very adept at communicating through their body language and gestures to let us know when they don't like something. If they're indicating that they don't like something, we don't want to make them do that. We want to follow their lead. We want to do short, small introductions to things. So, for example, I love doing rice boxes with little kids and introducing them to families as a way to work on sensory strategies as well as language and listening and so many wonderful things we can work on with a rice box. But there are some kids who don't want to put their hands in the rice. And I've had a lot of parents over the years take their child's hand and put it in the rice box, which then freaks the kids out. I want you to put yourself in their shoes. Now, if I had a bucket that was filled with something, but I didn't tell you what it was, and I just put your hand in it, you probably wouldn't be very happy with me. You probably wouldn't trust me, and you probably wouldn't want to be near me or any unknown kind of object or liquid, right? Because you wouldn't be sure if I would just take your hand and stick it in. So we want to do the same thing with our kiddos. We don't want to force them to engage in some kind of sensory play, whether it's touching things or sitting on big swings and slides and stuff like that. We want to go slow and give them small bits to practice with. For example, if I have a little one who doesn't want to touch the rice in the rice box, putting a little bit of rice in my hand, and then they'll feel a little bit more confident to take their finger and touch the rice. And then maybe we put a little bit more, and then maybe they'll put more fingers in. Over time, as they get that information, then they're like, oh, okay, I guess that's not so bad. They start to feel a little bit more comfortable touching the rice in the rice box. Just like I was sharing the story of Mary starting to gradually, with time and practice, feel more comfortable on the swing. So follow their lead, take it slow, and be patient. Okay, so there you have it, a quick overview of the sensory system and how it relates to learning in young children. I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, be sure to give me a like. It really helps me get my information out in front of other parents. Now, if you still have concerns and you're looking for really specific activities that you can do, as well as how you can incorporate language into those activities, because you know I'm all about toddler speech, definitely go down and check out my sensory strategy ebook. The link is down below. I filled it with activities for sensory seekers, sensory avoiders, as well as for children who struggle with motor planning, because that's all related to the sensory system as well. And if you have questions about motor planning, check out the video that I did on that. All right, that's it for today, you guys. Until next time.